This is Claudia Sheinbaum, and she has a lot of firsts. She is the first woman to be elected president of Mexico. She is also the first Jewish person to lead the Aztec Nation. And as all four of Sheinbaum's grandparents are from Eastern Europe, she will be the first person without Hispanic or indigenous heritage to lead Mexico, at least since Maximilian I in the 1860s. The stakes are high for Mexico's first presidenta. Sheinbaum will lead Mexico at a time of tremendous opportunity and tremendous challenge. The Madam President will face tough decisions that will determine if Mexico remains on its upward trajectory or if it regresses backwards. But who is Claudia Sheinbaum? And what is her political agenda? What challenges will she face during her term? And what does her presidency mean for the world at large? To understand Sheinbaum, it requires understanding Mexico's democracy. Mexico's democracy is quite young, with the first legitimate presidential election arguably occurring in 1994. Despite using similar democratic rules as the United States, Mexicans have been able to choose from 6 main political parties, with 3 being the most dominant. The PRD was the dominant left-wing party, and the PAN is the dominant right-wing party, and the PRI used to be the monopolistic party that dominated Mexican politics prior to the era of democracy. As Mexico democratized, the PRI remained a viable political party. Throughout its history, the PRI has shifted between being right-wing and left-wing, and could be described as center-right in its present incarnation. Mexican democracy is full of shifting alliances that change with every election. In Mexico's political landscape, allies can turn into enemies with every election cycle, and there's no shortage of drama within the parties themselves, with inter-party conflict being fairly common. Party loyalty is relatively low, as politicians will jump to a new party when it suits their interests. Changing parties is so common that these party-jumping politicians have a specific name: chapulines, or grasshoppers. While Mexican democracy was taking shape, Sheinbaum was focused on her academic career. She built an impressive resume in the STEM field, particularly in the disciplines of physics, energy, and environmental engineering. While primarily focused on the sciences, Sheinbaum was also active in politics, specifically in left-wing student movements. While teaching at UNAM in the 1990s, a friend introduced Sheinbaum to a fellow leftist, a man named Andres Manuel Lopez Obrador, better known as AMLO. While the two have opposite personalities and professional backgrounds, they were nearly identical in political ideology. Both were firmly on the left, and believed that the government had a responsibility to grow the middle class and fight poverty. In the year 2000, AMLO was elected governor of Mexico City, a position that could catapult him to the presidency. As governor, AMLO was able to recruit Sheinbaum out of academia, and she served as his environment secretary. AMLO was quite charismatic as governor, and became well known across the country. Behind the scenes, Sheinbaum played a crucial role in expanding Mexico City's transportation system. Despite being elected with only 38% of the vote, AMLO left the governor's office with an impressive approval rating of 84%. Naturally, AMLO decided that the presidency was the next logical step in his career. The 2006 presidential election would be one of Mexico's most dramatic. The sitting president, Vicente Fox of the right-leaning PAN, achieved a respectable approval rating of 53% near the end of his term. As the Mexican Constitution limits presidents to serving only a single term, Felipe Calderon would lead the PAN in the upcoming election. The PRI had little chance of winning due to internal divisions and external perceptions of corruption. In practical terms, the election pitted the right-wing PAN against the left-wing PRD, and polls predicted that it would be a very close election. It didn't take long for the campaign to get personal. Calderon painted AMLO as a dangerous leftist that threatened Mexico's institutions. AMLO was frequently compared to Venezuela's Hugo Chavez, and portrayed as someone drunk on nationalism that was far too radical to effectively lead Mexico. In turn, AMLO accused Calderon of being a puppet of foreign interests and domestic elites. He alleged that the PAN only served the interests of the wealthy, and not Mexico at large. Calderon was criticized for being a heartless neoliberal who did not care about the poor. The campaigns of both candidates were vicious and personal, and the fight continued beyond Election Day. As expected, the election was exceptionally close. In early vote counting, AMLO held a small lead, but as more polling stations closed, Calderon gained a slight advantage. After days of counting, Calderon was declared the winner by achieving 0.6 more percentage points than AMLO. But AMLO did not take the loss graciously. He declared himself as the illegitimate president, and that the election was a complete fraud. The European Union was officially observing the election and offered their expert opinion. The EU concluded that the will of the Mexican people was legitimately represented in the official results. But AMLO refused to accept the EU's report. He held massive protests in Mexico City, with crowd sizes easily measuring in the hundreds of thousands, if not millions. Protesters would set up encampments along the city's major roads, which caused notable traffic delays. The protests lingered on for several weeks, causing the people of Mexico City to grow incredibly frustrated with their former governor. But the political shenanigans didn't end there. AMLO and his supporters attempted to exploit a quirk in the Mexican Constitution. Per the Constitution, the president-elect must take the oath of office on December 1st, in front of a joint session of Congress. If this is not completed, then the office of the president is declared vacant, and new elections must be held. AMLO's supporters in the legislature concocted a plan to prevent Calderon from taking his required oath. They essentially blocked doors and hallways on Inauguration Day to prevent the ceremony from taking place. Calderon's supporters responded by shoving the protesting politicians out of the way. There was a lot of scuffling between the politicians on Inauguration Day. Eventually, a pathway was secured for Calderon, which led to a very awkward inauguration ceremony. Calderon rushed in, took the oath, sang the national anthem with the chamber, and then left. The entire ceremony lasted about 4 minutes. Not to be outstaged, AMLO held his own mock inauguration outside in a public square. Despite not being the legitimate winner of the election, the whole ordeal was quite damaging to AMLO's reputation. His critics had painted him as a dangerous radical that threatened Mexican democracy, and his actions proved his critics to be correct. While the pageantry did excite his base on the left, he alienated independent voters, which account for about 44% of the electorate. Throughout the ordeal, Sheinbaum proved to be a loyal ally to AMLO. To this day, she maintains her stance that the 2006 election was stolen from AMLO. With AMLO out of office, Sheinbaum left politics and returned to academia. She was a key contributor to the IPCC's fourth climate assessment, a project which won the Nobel Peace Prize in 2007. In addition to her academic work, she continued to hold left-leaning views, and remained to be a fervent supporter of AMLO. When the 2012 election arrived, AMLO would once again be the candidate for the left-leaning PRD party, but this election would be far less dramatic. Enrique Peña Nieto easily led the PRI to victory, and AMLO had a smaller percentage of the vote than in the previous election. AMLO would again make accusations of voting irregularities, but in a much less dramatic fashion than the previous election. The disappointing loss created fractures between AMLO and the PRD. At his core, AMLO is an old-school leftist. His core values are helping the poor, strengthening unions, creating strong pensions, and energy nationalism, an issue we'll dig into a little bit later. AMLO was at odds with issues adopted by the younger, college-educated left. AMLO was less concerned about new left issues such as gay marriage, feminism, and to a much lesser extent environmentalism. In AMLO's mind, these new left issues were pet projects of the privileged. His main goal was to serve the poor, and social justice issues created unnecessary obstacles. Because of these differences, AMLO left the PRD and created a new political party called Morena. This was a daring and controversial move at the time. Leftists hated the idea, as it would split the left vote. They had already struggled to win the presidency when united under the PRD. A new left party would only hurt them at the ballot. Pundits thought that the new party would be the end of AMLO. Few believed that Morena could compete with Mexico's big three parties. Voters had unfavorable views of the new Morena party, with only 21% supporting the new party at its inception. But one person who did believe in AMLO's new party was Claudia Sheinbaum. She quickly left the PRD and joined AMLO's new Morena party. Despite the unpopular start of Morena, AMLO was still a charismatic and effective politician. He was able to recruit other politicians and deployed a grassroots strategy that touched nearly every corner of Mexico. When the 2015 midterm elections arrived, Morena performed surprisingly well. They captured 35 seats in the Chamber of Deputies, the lower house of Mexico's bicameral legislature. This made Morena the fifth strongest party in the chamber. Not significant to wield any serious power, but not bad for a new party that got off to a rocky start. But then the political landscape would change dramatically in favor of AMLO and his Morena party. There were a litany of issues that made voters more than just unsatisfied. Some of the key issues included the war on drugs, energy nationalism, and corruption. Voters believed that these issues were spiraling out of control, and that the PAN and the PRI failed to address voters' concerns. And a new external issue was born just across the northern border. In 2016, the United States elected Donald Trump, and Trump said some particularly rude things about Mexico. Things so rude that I dare not quote him out of fear of this video getting demonetized. President Peña Nieto did not seem to strike back particularly hard against Trump. A few speeches were made, and some diplomatic cold shoulders were displayed, but nothing strong enough to satisfy voters.
Donald Trump's main policy proposal, the one he began his campaign with, is that he intends to build a wall between the United States and Mexico along the border, and he intends to get Mexico to pay for it.
There is a way to have Mexico pay a wall, but any decisions inside the United States is a decision of its government.
If the United States was going to elect a chauvinist nationalist, Mexicans wanted one of their own. AMLO was quick to fill this role. In 2017, AMLO released a book called Oi, Trump, which was a collection of AMLO's fiery anti-Trump speeches. Beyond attacking Trump, AMLO continued to recruit other politicians to Morena, all while engaging in grassroots campaigning. Morena members engaged directly with the people across all of Mexico in an effort to hear everyone's voice. Sheinbaum played an active role in this grassroots effort, which included door-to-door outreach and organizing local town hall sessions in the state of Puebla. While grassroots is an age-old strategy in any democracy, AMLO pursued a new strategy: YouTube. AMLO had long felt that he was mischaracterized by the media. Instead of being constrained by the filter of the media, AMLO broadcasted his message directly to the voters through YouTube. His official channel has over 4 million subscribers at the time of this writing. All of AMLO's hard work paid off. As the next election neared, it became apparent that AMLO was now the frontrunner. As the 2018 election approached, the PRI had little chance of remaining in power. Peña Nieto's approval rating had sunk to 28%. The PAN and the PRD formed an unlikely alliance with each other. As they both lost in the previous election, they decided to join forces. While the PAN is a right-wing party, and the PRD is on the left, both were concerned about Morena's rising popularity. The PAN would be the senior partner in the alliance, and would be led by Ricardo Anaya, an articulate, data-driven member of the PAN. But this alliance was no match for the support AMLO gained over the past few years. AMLO painted Anaya as a privileged elitist, who was not capable of bringing the radical changes that voters demanded. When Election Day arrived, it was an absolute sweep. AMLO won the presidency quite decisively, earning more than double the amount of votes than that of Anaya. And while Mexico does not use the Electoral College, it is worth noting that AMLO won 31 of 32 states. Morena would also dominate in the legislative elections, capturing 43% of the Senate and 38% of the Chamber of Deputies. To say the least, it was a historic night for Morena. One of Morena's many victors was Claudia Sheinbaum, as she decided to run for governor of Mexico City. She was elected with 48% of the vote, and now held the same office that AMLO used to launch himself as a national figure. With Morena firmly in charge, it was time for AMLO to make some dramatic changes. Energy policy is a touchy issue for nearly every country, and Mexico is no exception. Unlike its northern neighbor, in Mexico, the state owns all mineral rights. Private landowners have no say in what happens to the commodities beneath their land. This practice dates back to when President Cardenas nationalized Mexico's oil industry. which forced British and US oil companies to sell their assets to the Mexican government. This is often viewed as a patriotic moment in Mexican history, and many voters don't want to change from the status quo. Oil is managed by a company called Pemex. Pemex is not a publicly traded corporation, but rather a state-owned enterprise, meaning that it's obligated to follow orders from the government, not shareholders. The intent of Pemex is to serve as a public good, as opposed to seek a profit. For most of Mexican history, this arrangement worked very well, especially during the 1970s global oil crisis. But then oil glut arrived in the 1980s, causing oil prices to crash. This was very bad news for Mexico, and caused an economic disaster known as the Lost Decade. Despite the economic calamity, Pemex remains a state-owned enterprise to this day, and while the company is popular with the public, it faces deep systemic problems. Problems that lack a solution that is both practical and politically popular. For one, Pemex must surrender 35% of all oil revenues to the state. This policy has made Pemex cash-starved for quite some time. Like most nations, Mexico extracted all the easy-to-reach oil early in its history. The remaining untapped oil is quite costly to extract, both in terms of upfront capital, construction time, and expected time to recoup investment costs. As the state siphons 35% of revenues, Pemex has had a difficult time building the necessary cash reserves for new oil extraction. Pemex's capital crunch has come to fore in recent decades. Mexico oil production peaked in 2005, and has been on a sharp decline ever since. Oil is a very capital-intensive industry, and Pemex simply doesn't have the capital. Major oil discoveries in the Gulf of Mexico in 2012 failed to remedy this dilemma. These were deep water oil reserves, and Pemex simply does not have the capital, nor the technical expertise to retrieve this oil. President Peña Nieto sought a compromise that would allow oil to remain nationalized, while also allowing foreign companies to extract the oil. The president would simply license the oil extraction rights to foreign companies, ensuring that the Mexican state would still receive some form of commission. It would be a public-private compromise, but the new plan was politically unpopular from its inception, and critics would call it backdoor privatization.
Quitan el petróleo. Sería como desangrar a México.
The plan became even more unpopular when international oil prices crashed. The falling oil prices spooked foreign investment, and very few licenses were sold. Further compounding Mexico's oil problems was the shale oil revolution in the United States. The US has historically been a big purchaser of Mexican oil, but with the shale oil revolution, the US is now a net oil exporter. US crude oil imports from Mexico peaked in 2006, and it is unlikely to recover. All of these factors have been very bad news for Pemex. Pemex has been operating at a loss for about 15 years. The company currently holds a debt of $102 billion, making it the most indebted oil company in the world. While AMLO has made positive efforts in oil refining, oil production has only marginally increased. AMLO revoked the licensing option for deep-sea drilling, a move that most voters loved. While popular, it failed to solve Pemex's lingering problems. When AMLO was campaigning, he promised to raise oil production to 2.5 million barrels per day. This promise went unfulfilled, and oil production only had marginal improvements under AMLO. Oil will be a major dilemma for Claudia Sheinbaum. Allowing foreign licenses to Mexican oil will be wildly unpopular, but Pemex is in dire need of restructuring to survive. One option is for the state to absorb all of Pemex's debt, but this could also hurt Mexico's credit rating and cause the peso to crash. It also has considerable political risks, as now the public would be supporting Pemex instead of the other way around. One way or another, oil will be a major challenge for Sheinbaum, with no easy solution in sight. While AMLO was unable to solve the Pemex problem, he was able to raise about 5 million Mexicans out of poverty. AMLO is a big proponent of social welfare programs, and it would be reasonable to compare him to FDR. AMLO increased social welfare spending by 115% over his 6-year term. In 2023, nearly 34% of Mexicans received some form of social benefit. One key beneficiary of these new programs were the elderly. AMLO supercharged the government's pension plan, providing universal pensions to everyone over the age of 65. Young adults also received new benefits from the state. People from the age of 18 to 29 who are unemployed and not receiving education or training would be offered apprenticeships with participating companies, while also receiving a monthly stipend. Additionally, young adults from low-income families could receive state-paid scholarships for education. Over 1 million young people enrolled in these programs. Small businesses also got their share. Government-backed microloans were made available to businesses who didn't have access to traditional credit. These loans were interest-free and had generous repayment terms. Vulnerable groups were also eligible for receiving cash directly from the state. The extreme poor, single mothers, the disabled, and other groups were eligible to receive cash directly from the state without any obligations. And this is just a snapshot of AMLO's many welfare programs. In the aggregate, these results have been impressive. It is estimated that AMLO's social welfare programs lifted nearly 5 million people out of poverty, but critics point out that these programs are not financially sustainable. After all, AMLO didn't raise taxes. The president did implement new tax enforcement strategies for the existing tax codes, but this wasn't sufficient to stop Mexico's debt to GDP from growing. Under AMLO, Mexico's debt as a percentage of GDP did have a slight uptick of about 3 percentage points. Nonetheless, AMLO's social welfare policies are wildly popular, and he did have one other strategy to help balance the books. While AMLO went on a spending spree for welfare programs, government workers weren't so lucky. The president slashed bureaucratic budgets far and wide across multiple agencies. This included cutting the wages of frontline government workers, as well as department heads, and would even include cuts for the office of the presidency. All former presidents saw their pension plans gone. To show that he wasn't above the austerity, AMLO shrunk his own salary by nearly 60%. AMLO was only paid about $6,000 per month as the president of Mexico, and included a bylaw that no government employee could earn more than the president. The cuts brought mixed opinions. Proponents argued that this was a fantastic way to fight corruption. After all, high-ranking bureaucratic positions had been awarded to those with friends in high places, as opposed to their qualifications. But detractors highlight that the shrinking budgets made it difficult for the bureaucracies to fulfill their responsibilities to the public. The most controversial cut targeted the Institute of the National Electorate, better known as INE. INE is a completely autonomous bureaucracy that is responsible for ensuring that Mexican elections are fair and legitimate. The organization is popular amongst the people, as it has done a respectable job of playing referee for Mexican elections. And when AMLO brought cuts to INE, the organization had to lay off 80% of its workforce. This cut had a small, but notable negative impact on AMLO's popularity, and protesters marched in Mexico City in opposition to the cuts, many of which chose to wear the color pink, the same color used by INE. Despite the protests, AMLO continued to enjoy high approval ratings. As AMLO is nearing the end of his term, it is fair to say that he lived up to his promise of bringing radical change. AMLO is a polarizing figure. Many voters have a strong opinion of AMLO, be it negative or positive, but AMLO's supporters outweigh his opponents. The president's approval ratings consistently rank above 60%. AMLO, like all Mexican presidents, are only allowed to serve a single, 6-year term. When it became time to appoint a successor, Sheinbaum was the obvious choice. She had proven herself to be one of AMLO's most loyal deputies for a long time, and given her experience as the governor of Mexico City, she was the obvious choice to lead Morena. Like many elections before, the election of 2024 would bring surprising results. Morena formed an alliance with the Workers' Party and the Green Party. And instead of facing the PRI, PAN, or PRD, the old big three parties of Mexico decided to form a grand alliance, with the PAN serving as the senior party. The old big three were so concerned with Morena that they opted to settle their differences and unite as one. But the alliance of former enemies was no match for Sheinbaum and Morena. When the polls closed, Sheinbaum won an impressive 61% of the vote. She received more than double of her closest competitor, making this a historic election for Mexican politics. And Morena won much more than the office of the presidency. Both the Chamber of Deputies and Senate were up for a complete re-election, and Morena and its allies dominated the Congress. In the lower Chamber of Deputies, Morena and its allies captured nearly 75% of the chamber. Perhaps most surprising is that the Green Party won a total of 75 seats, giving it more power than the PAN or the PRI. and the PRD only won a single seat, likely signaling the death of this once prestigious party. The Senate bore similar results. Morena and its allies captured about 65% of the entire chamber. While the PAN, PRI, and PRD did slightly better in the upper house, they are still very much on the outside of all important decision-making. Morena and its left-leaning allies performed so well in this election that they will face little obstacles in the upcoming session. The party achieved a supermajority in the lower house, and is just 2 seats shy of a supermajority in the Senate. This means that Morena will likely make big, constitutional changes in the upcoming session. And now the question on everybody's mind is, what will Morena do with all this power? There's one quirk in Mexican democracy that will give us some insight. The new Congress will be sworn in 1 month before the new president, thus giving AMLO an incredible amount of power in his final month of office. A few months before the election, AMLO presented new constitutional amendments that went nowhere due to opposition in the Congress. But with Morena's overwhelming victory, these constitutional amendments are likely to pass in the final days of the AMLO administration. Of the nearly 20 constitutional changes AMLO wishes to make, some amendments would enshrine Morena's social welfare policies. Examples include securing pension benefits that would entitle retirees to compensation that is equal to 100% of their final salaries, higher minimum wage that automatically changes with inflation, and scholarships to students from poor families. But most of AMLO's constitutional amendments would radically change Mexican democracy and the separation of powers. While the president won the love of the people, the judicial branch proved to be an obstacle to AMLO's agenda. At many times throughout his presidency, judges blocked legislation of the Morena party. In response, AMLO is proposing a constitutional amendment that would make all federal judges subject to a popular vote. This includes Mexico's Supreme Court. This amendment has raised concerns amongst many legal scholars, as it may entice judges to become more focused on elections, as opposed to enforcing the rule of law. And that's not the only big change coming to Mexico's political structure. AMLO's constitutional reforms would also do away with the Institute of the National Electorate. As of now, INE is mostly autonomous, and is not beholden to the president or the legislature. But AMLO doesn't like this autonomy, and wants to replace INE with a brand new organization called the National Institute of Elections and Consultations, or INEC. And unlike INE, INEC's leaders would be elected by popular vote. Critics of this change have compared it to allowing fans to elect the referees of the World Cup. Lastly, AMLO wants a constitutional amendment that would ban GMO corn. But Mexico doesn't produce that much GMO corn, and rather imports it from the United States. If this amendment passes, it could trigger a trade war with Mexico's northern neighbor. The United States is easily Mexico's largest export market, which purchases about 3/4 of all Mexican exports. If Mexico restricts US exports, the US may retaliate with restrictions of their own. Claudia Sheinbaum has indicated that she supports all of these constitutional amendments. Even if AMLO is unable to pass these amendments in his final days of office, Sheinbaum is likely to carry the torch when she officially takes the presidency. Financial markets did not react favorably to Mexico's election. The value of the peso fell by nearly 10% in the aftermath of the election, and corresponding stock indicators have also taken a tumble. The fate of these constitutional amendments will have a heavy impact on the Mexican economy. So, will Sheinbaum and the rise of Morena be a good thing for Mexico? The reality is that this question cannot be answered in the present. While left-wing economics can lead to more equal wealth distribution, it can also limit macroeconomic growth. And it is far too early to tell which reality lies ahead for Mexico. So stay tuned.